Colt Single Action Army revolver, the SAA or Model P, the Peacemaker. How many monikers, sobriquets can one gun have? But that gun's got them. And the reason is because it's just that cool. It came out in 1873. It wasn't the first center fire, revolver with the self-contained metallic cartridge of Colts, but it was, after a very short lead time, it was the epitome of the refinement of such a thing. And it really is a gorgeous gun.
It is a gun that has captivated the American psyche for generations. It was a big, powerful handgun. The .45 Colt is a no-joke cartridge, and originally intended for military use. People soon found out that this thing's actually quite fun to shoot, and quite powerful enough for defensive use, or for cowboys having to shoot their horses if they're being drugged to death. It's a gun that has lines that have become iconic.
By the 1860s, Colt, the name was already synonymous with revolver. But the 1860s were a weird time for revolver development because it kind of stalled for about a decade. And the reason for that is what is probably one of the most famous, or rather infamous, patents in firearm history, which is the Rollin White patent. One of the critical aspects of his design was the back of the cylinder was bored through, so you could insert a cartridge into the rear of the cylinder. And Rollin White became really infamous for aggressively defending his patent. So Colt didn't really have any leeway to pursue what was really, by the end of the 1860s, a clear direction for the development of the revolver. But by 1869, the Rollin White patent expires. And so Colt tasks two of its employees, Charles Richards and William Mason, to finally take the Colt revolver to this next step of evolution. But the Army hated this open-top revolver. So Colt went back to the drawing board and tasked its two employees, Richards and Mason, with developing an improved version of its new model holster revolver. And what they came back with was what ultimately became the Colt Single Action Army.
First of all, it's a simple gun. It basically uses the lockwork of the old, Dragoons and 51 Navies and 60 Armies. It didn't change much, which is a very simple and reliable action. The gun with that plow handle grip, it just fits in your hand beautifully. They're natural pointers, whether they have the fancy flat top rear sights or not. You can get them in any caliber you want. If you like 38 Special, you can get a 38 Special, 44-40, 22, 455 Webley, whatever. You can get them in any caliber you want. They're just a wonderful, wonderful, comfortable gun to shoot. They're reliable and they're super rugged.
The single action it's classy. Is it because that's all we've ever seen on TV and movies? Maybe. Is it the most practical of the guns? No. Smith & Wesson Schofield is for sure, because you can pop that baby open, empty 6 rounds as fast as you can look at it and reload it just as quickly. Can't do that with a Peacemaker. It's one of the most photographed guns of the time period, though, and it was manufactured from 1873 right up until the eve of the Second World War in 1940. And during that time, 357,000 of them were made. Half of them were made before the turn of the century.
This was a gun that, it had a cylinder base pin, so it could be disassembled easily. It was chambered for the .45 Colt cartridge, which Colt had developed with Union metallic cartridge specifically for this gun. And that's a cartridge that continues to live on today through the 45 ACP, because the original loading for the 45 Colt was replicated in the shorter case of the 45 ACP, which is you got a 230 grain bullet going about 850 feet per second. That was what the Colt 45 was designed to do in the 1870s. And of course it had the top strap, so it was a significantly stronger revolver than anything that had come before it.
For the collector, oh my gosh, where do you start? Engraved models, blue models, nickel models, gutta percha grips, hard rubber, stag, ivory, pearl. And it's a fantastic gun. It was adopted by the U.S. military. It was replaced in 1892, but the Rough Riders are still carrying theirs up San Juan Hill in 98. George Patton's using his in Mexico in 1915, and notches in the grips. And he's walking ashore at Sicily with one of them, a single action, in 1943. So it's a gun that just encompasses a huge era and is really one of the hallmarks of that era.
So the thing about the Single Action Army is, yes, it had its military service, but it's a solid frame, big gun designed around a black powder cartridge. And the world was moving on, starting in the late 1880s, Colt had developed the swing-out revolver, the DAs they were called, double action, and they have swing-out cylinders that you can just open them up and get all the cartridges out at one time. Seems like the better mousetrap. Well, the problem is those guns were very anemically powered. So you have the gun that's basically being retired by the military, replaced by the latest, newest high-velocity, double-action revolver. And when that proved to not perform, they brought the Single Action Army back. And so then you end up with some big Colt double-action revolvers, and then you move into the 1911, and there's another icon. But the civilian population never really gave up on the Single Action Army. They have always loved these guns.
Really, if it wasn't for the resurgence of the Western on television, there might not have been a resurgence of the actual Colt Single Action Army, because the Colt had been taken out of production in 1941. A, because of the war, and B, because of tepid sales. So when all of a sudden they started using single actions in these TV odors, there became a renewed demand for them, and they started remaking the guns again.
This group of guns is what becomes known as the second generation Single Action Army. And Colt makes these guns until the mid-1970s, but by that point, these guns had been made for more than 100 years using the same tooling, the same machinery, and it gets worn out. And so Colt has to retool. And so they stopped making these second generation guns in 1976. And Colt puts new machinery together and they start making guns again. But the public notices that these new guns are just a little different. I mean, they still act like a Colt, they still look like a Colt, they still sound like a Colt. They're not quite Colts. There's a few little manufacturing expediencies that they've introduced to the guns. And so that makes them not quite the old Single Action Army anymore. So these are what's known as the third generation guns. Now Colt, since then, has really kind of gone back to making what is functionally your traditional Single Action Army, because they realize that's what the public wants. But still, these guns are known as third generation Single Action Armies, and that's what you can still buy today. And I think that's what's kind of amazing about the Colt Single Action Army is here you have a gun that was introduced 150 years ago, and you can still go to the same company that made it 150 years ago and buy the same gun.